Tonight's able moderator is Linda Kane, an attorney who moved to the Asheville area after her retirement from the prestigious Florida law firm of Holland and Knight 10 years ago. Since her retirement, she has invested in her passions for literacy and civic education and involvement. She is also the past board member and member of the League of Women Voters of Asheville-Buncombe County, working in the area of voter registration and civic education. I'll turn over control of this night to Ms. Kane for an introduction of our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, and I also welcome you, and I welcome, aside from all of our civilian citizens we have here tonight, we apparently have two of our county commissioners, Mr. Joe Belcher and Mr. Robert Presley, have joined us in addition. And I don't know if we have, is anybody, any other elected official hiding out somewhere that we haven't seen? Okay, terrific. Okay, I'm very excited to be the moderator of this forum tonight and looking forward to what we are all going to learn. Our speakers tonight are Senator Terry Van Dyne, who is the senator for North Carolina in the District 49. She's our minority whip and has served in the legislature since November of 2014. We also have with us tonight Chairman Carl Mumpower, who is the chairman of the GOP here in Buncombe County. He served, he served for 8 years on our city council, and he said he thinks 8 years is enough for anyone to serve. So I think that it's an interesting concept. He also served as the Republican. No, that we have term limits. I'm sorry. I think term limits, not whether he serves for 8 years, but term limits. I'm sorry. I felt like that was a strange laugh, so we want to be clear about what we're saying. He was also a Republican candidate for Congress and presently works as a clinical and family psychologist. So, now this forum has been advertised and is intended to be an educational one. So I want to tell you what our guidelines are going to be for tonight. As James just said, it's an information session and not a debate. It's the hope of the co-host that the audience members will leave here tonight with a better understanding of what the leaders of each of our parties think about are the most important points relating to the constitutional amendments, which you will all have the opportunity to vote on or before November 6th. The amendments are going to be discussed in the order in which they will appear on the ballot. There are about 200 handouts, so people should have all gotten one, I hope. On those handouts are the wording of the amendments as they will appear on the ballot. And it also, the Secretary of State has an official statement about the amendments, and those are on the handout, along with the URLs for the Secretary of State, which you can go to get more information. The actual amendments themselves are on the Secretary of State's line and are much longer and more detailed than the captions which are on your ballot. Oh, okay. The speakers will alternate which one goes first, and each is going to have 3 minutes to talk about the amendments. There will not be any rebuttals because we don't have enough time for all of that. Now, we understand that many of you may have strong, impassioned views about what is going to be said tonight, but we ask you to honor the right of each speaker to analyze and decide issues and explain them to you based on their respective points of view, understanding that everyone in this room wants what is best for our country, our state, our county, and our city, and we should assume that is where people's opinions are coming from. We please ask that there be no outbursts for or against what any of the speakers say, because we, the co-hosts, believe that this forum could begin a leadership of supporting civil discourse that all of us want to start to make our community a better place to live. Questions will be taken at the end, and I'm sorry, have we handed out slips or how? People have slips, okay. After the end of each comment on an amendment, you can pass your questions to the end, and someone from the league will pick them up. We are going to be going through them because we don't want to have repetitive questions, and we want to make sure the questions are on point. So the one thing I forgot to do was to ask our panelists, I was going to do a coin flip as to who goes first. Do you want to do a coin flip, or do you want to decide? Okay, we'll and then Senator Van Dyne will go first on the first amendment, and then you'll go first on the second amendment. Okay. All right. The First Amendment reads, a constitutional amendment protecting the right of the people to hunt, fish, and harvest wildlife. Terry, Senator Van Dyne, as I mentioned, you will have 3 minutes to speak on this. Our timer is right up in front. We'll give you a 1-minute warning and a 30-second warning. Thank you.
First, okay, how's that? I think I turned it off. I'm sorry. Thank you for being here. So, I've got to get in my group, Paul. Several weeks ago, I had the privilege of speaking with a group of women and about a number of things, mostly the progressive vision for North Carolina. And afterwards, one of them came up to me and said, Terry, if you do nothing else, defend democracy. And at the time, I'm not sure that I understood what she was talking about. And then the amendments started coming. And this is an excellent example. Our Constitution should be sacred. It should be something that we can change, but never for frivolous reasons, only for important reasons after serious, lengthy debate. And this amendment in particular does nothing. When I asked several times in committee, why do we need this amendment? There was never a good answer. When I asked, what are the impediments to hunting and fishing in North Carolina? There was never a good answer. Never once in committee was there anything specific about why we need this law. Now, I support hunting and fishing. I have very fond memories of fishing with my dad. I don't get to do that anymore, but that doesn't mean I don't get that it's important. But we don't put constitutional amendments unless they're necessary, and this one clearly is not. Mr. Bumgarner?
Thanks for caring about the future of our state. Grateful for an opportunity for civil discourse. I'm grateful to speak to the engaged folks here, and you obviously are, you wouldn't be here, about why North Carolina citizens should vote for the proposed amendments. This commendable effort is narrow in its aim, contrary to what you might hear. And it simply comes down to an effort to preserve liberties while impairing those who would willfully undermine our state's system of good governance. In evaluating your vote for or against these amendments, may I suggest that you look equally at the issues of why and why not. Opponents are offering a parade of frankly exaggerated accusations against these amendments, when in truth all they do is, number one, protect a current liberty, number two, put our judicial representation in the hands of the many over the one, number three, help ensure the integrity of the voting booth, and number four, stop politicians from reaching ever deeper into the pockets of the taxpayer. These are worthy endeavors, and I look forward to sharing more on why and to answering your questions. Now let's start with the first one, the right to hunt, fish, and harvest wildlife. 23 states have adopted this amendment. The why is simple. Too many people who hunt, fish, and harvest with a cart in a grocery store are seeking to undermine the rights of those who do so with a gun or a pole out in nature. This amendment seeks to preserve this right and heritage. Republicans recognize we do not secure a healthy future by betraying our past. 1, 2, 3. Preserve a current freedom. Can't hear. That's intentional. The mission. Number 1, preserve a current freedom. Number 2, keep elitist groups from impairing a traditional value and opportunity. Number 3, keep options open for those who prefer individual effort over commerce to secure their food. Thank you.
Thank you. If you have questions, and it doesn't, on any amendment, it doesn't have to be on this one, please pass your questions to the edge. Okay. The second amendment, as it will appear on your ballot, will read, Constitutional Amendment to strengthen protections for the victims of crime, to establish certain absolute basic rights for victims, and to ensure the enforcement of these rights. I'll probably go first.
Strengthen protections for crime victims. Increasingly in our society, criminals are afforded extraordinary protections. Too often the equation of rights balanced with responsibilities is skewed toward rights that minimize accountability. The victims of crime are often further victimized by this lack of balance. The impaired state of our judicial system, I'm very comfortable saying this here, both in terms of delays, costs, inconsistencies, underfunding, unpredictable outcomes, and broad inefficiencies adds insult to injury. Republicans believe those harmed by crime deserve considerations at least equal to those who commit those crimes. So 1, 2, 3. Our criminal justice system prioritizes rights over responsibility. We believe balance matters. Number 2, victims are at the bottom of our judicial food chain. And number 3, victims are often victimized by the judicial system as surely as criminals. Thank you.
Democrats, in fact, agree with much of that. Where I take issue is the fact that we already, in our Constitution, have a Victims' Bill of Rights. And many of those things elaborated in this legislation are already in our Constitution. Right now, if you want to be notified about the status of someone that has perpetrated a crime, all you need to do is contact the Attorney General's office and you will be notified. We already have restitution in our Constitution. So this legislation, although it expands that a bit, we could do this with regular legislation. However, it does not come with the appropriation necessary to implement it. So at the county level, and keep in mind 80% of our counties are rural, struggling to make ends meet. And this is an unfunded mandate on those counties that may in fact slow down the wheels of justice because of the reporting requirements inherent in this law. It doesn't belong in the Constitution. These are things we can work out in legislation, and then we can make sure that we fund the work necessary to be done.
Please pass questions if you have them. The next constitutional amendment is a constitutional amendment to reduce the income tax rate in North Carolina to a maximum allowable rate of 7%.
One thing you need to know is that 7% is above the current rate, which is about a little bit more than 5%. And Although no one, including myself, looks forward to paying taxes, what I would say is the problem I have with this amendment is, first, it limits our ability as a state to respond to emergencies, and we're currently seeing what that looks like. And even more importantly, it continues an effort that has gone on for the last, well, at least since I've been in the General Assembly, the last 5 years at least, to shift the burden of taxation from corporations and the well-to-do to the working class. Because it only caps income tax. So if we have another recession, which we inevitably will have, we cannot adjust our income tax if we need to pay our teachers, for example. So that leaves us with adjusting either sales taxes or fees or property taxes. And those are taxes that are fixed regardless of the economy. And they also hurt people at the lower end of the scale more than they do at the upper end of the scale. If every dime you make, you have to spend to feed and clothe your family, then sales taxes hurt you more than they do someone who is able to put money away. And for that reason, this is a very dangerous move, and I urge you to vote no.
This amendment seeks to impair politicians and political movements who believe in robbing one set of pockets to fill another of their choosing. Republicans believe in keeping the lion's share of earned money in the pockets of those who earn it. We're proud of that. We're proud of that. We're not ashamed of it. Our opposition has an opposite view, as demonstrated in their platform, promises, and past behavior. We are not ashamed to say we want to contain their appetites. In 2019, the state rate will drop to 5.25 under Republican leadership. 7% cap provides more than needed flexibility for extraordinary times or events. It does not lend itself to the routine that the opposition party would like. The rainy day fund that we haven't had until we determine Republican leadership in our state, provides an additional cushion while encouraging fiscal restraint. There are numerous other revenue sources, as my colleague indicated, that can be tapped and all require scrutiny and accountability. And that's a big part of this. We do not want to make it easy on people who spend other people's money to do it in an efficient fashion. A cap will stop them. Thank you.
Any further questions, please pass them. Thank you. The next amendment is a constitutional amendment to require voters to provide photo identification before voting in person.
See, I believe I'm first.
Yes, you are.
We are surrounded by evidence of unscrupulous individuals. Can you hear me in the back now? No? Golly, I'm so sorry. We are surrounded by evidence of unscrupulous individuals, political movements, and special interest groups who know no boundaries in attempting to secure their ideations. In unity with 38 other states, North Carolina is seeking to preserve the safety of one of the most important pieces of our governance puzzle, the voting booth. Republicans believe seeking ID for voting booth access is important for the same reason ID is necessary to board a plane, purchase a six-pack, or apply for food stamps. 1, 2, 3. It reduces temptations and opportunity for voter fraud by either side. Number 2, we are the only state in the Southeast that does not have voter ID. And number 3, I will be frank with you in saying that the idea that minorities cannot get ID is racist, sexist, and dishonest.
We tried this. In 2013, we passed a voter ID bill, and it was in effect in 2016 during the primary. And over 1,000 people were denied, 1,000 people, not maybe the 1 or 2 people that someone thinks might have voted twice. 1,000 people were denied a ballot on election day because of that voter ID bill. It is simply not true that everyone has a driver's license. In fact, in Buncombe County, there are 5,000, and I use rough numbers because my memory isn't as good as it used to be, but there are more than 5,000 people who are legally entitled to vote, they are registered to vote, who do not have a voter ID. Now, when we tried this in 2016, they looked at those incidences where people were turned away from the polls. And a federal court found that our voter ID bill, and this is a quote, it discriminated against African Americans with surgical precision. That should be chilling to anyone who cares about the sanctity of the ballot. And for that reason, I urge you not to support this bill. Think about it. How many women in here have a driver's license that maybe has a name different from what they have now because they've been divorced or gotten married? It is just simply not true that we all have the IDs we would need to pass muster to vote under Republican legislation.
The fifth proposed amendment, can you hear me in the back? Okay. Is the following, so you have to listen carefully to this one. Constitutional amendment to change the process for filling judicial vacancies that occur between judicial elections from a process in which the governor has the sole appointment power to a process in which the people of the state nominate individuals to fill vacancies by way of a commission comprised of appointees made by the judicial, executive, and legislative branches, charged with making recommendations to the legislature as to which nominees are deemed qualified. Then, the legislature will recommend at least 2 nominees to the governor via legislative action not subject to gubernatorial veto. And the governor will appoint judges from among these nominees.
Senator Heiss, when we were debating appointment of judges in committee this year, said, he made the comment that since it is the General Assembly that writes the laws, aren't they in the best position to determine who should interpret them? That is a fundamental error in understanding of our Constitution and the need for checks and balances. It is not the legislature that should decide who interprets our laws. And what this constitutional amendment would do is shift the power from the executive committee to appoint judges in the event of a vacancy to the General Assembly. There's a lot of talk about commissions, but if you read the legislation closely, it creates a checkpoint, or a choke point, and that choke point is the General Assembly. They can forward to the governor as few as 2 nominees, and if which means they have control, not the governor. So there's a lot of language in this bill, but all it does is shifts power from the executive to the legislature. That is fundamentally a contradiction of checks and balances that should be part of our Constitution.
In contrast, I would suggest that this is a simple attempt. Nothing in government is simple, but the attempt is to reduce the partisanship and unilateral control of the government that continues to cloud and complicate healthy election management functions. Republicans want to keep the ballot box and those who administer it as free from manipulation as possible. That's not what happens today. We're talking about an 8-member bipartisan board free from control by the legislative, executive, or judicial branches who may benefit from manipulating the election process. Number 2, members are appointed by the House and the Senate and by representatives from both parties, regardless of who is in control. It's a 50-50 deal, and that's a healthy thing for our future. And it prohibits legislators from serving on boards and commissions which exercise executive or judicial authority. That constrains partisan politics, and that's what should happen in our election voting booths. And then the most important thing of all to me, it will help us pick or handle the process and to pick people who will serve on the basis of merit, not political favor. Thank you.
Okay, the last constitutional amendment, and be sure if you have any questions to please pass them to the people walking around. Thanks. Is a constitutional amendment to establish an 8-member bipartisan board of ethics and elections enforcement in the Constitution to administer ethics and election laws. You're first, thank you.
This change stops the process of filling judicial vacancies by political patronage at the hands of the governor and establishes a nonpartisan merit commission appointed by the Chief Justice, the Governor, and the General Assembly. This step will help keep judicial selection more broadly in the hands of the voters who elect many of those people, reduce party dominance of the judiciary, and will apply equally to Republicans and Democrats. Republicans like amendments that support the idea of big people over big government. Concentrated power supports the latter. Number 1, governors on both sides. Purdue would be a recent example. Have laid aside their vetting process and standard operating procedures to make convenient last-minute appointments for last day in office. Governors repeatedly appoint judges who have been rejected by voters to vacancies and who have political clout but no judicial experience. That's wrong. Under current constitutional guidelines, a 2-term governor would appoint 40% of our judges. Professional qualifications should be the primary filter for all judicial appointments. I would close in saying this. The 6 proposed amendments to North Carolina's Constitution are about power. On one hand, we have a Republican mission to limit power, pursue a bipartisan neutrality where it is needed, and keep more power in the hands of the people than politicians. On the other hand, we have the opposition party who seeks to preserve power for politicians, maintain partisanship, and made government bigger and thus people smaller. I would propose to you that the Republican agenda stands on the right side of our heritage and our best potentials for a prosperous and sustainable future. Please vote for those amendments, and thanks again for this opportunity.
So what this last amendment does is it creates a Board of Elections and Ethics that is 50% Democrat and 50% Republican. What we have now is a board that is 50% that is made up of four Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 1 independent. The problem I have with this is that it encourages gridlock. A 50-50 board sounds good, but tends to not be effective, okay? And when you need to react to a situation that comes up like we did recently here with our early voting sites, it creates a situation where you cannot respond to that situation because gridlock keeps us from doing anything. And I think that's the real purpose of this amendment, is to keep us from responding to the needs of the voters. And for that reason, I urge you to vote no on this one as well.
That is the end of our first part, and I think we should thank both of our participants. I need some questions. Who's got the questions? I need some. Maybe. Okay. Okay. Our first question is on hunting and fishing amendment, the first one. Do we not already have the right to hunt and fish? So is it better to have a law rather than change the Constitution? And Terry, so you're first.
I graduated from Owen High School in 2000. Wait a minute. In 1970. It was convenient. Testing. I graduated from high school, from Owen High School in 1970. It was very familiar to see young men with shotguns in the back of their windows. I routinely carried a case or old-timer knife, and so did most of my peers. We're in a different world today. That scares people. When people are scared or offended or like to have control, they start saying no to things that other people do that they don't do. And there are a lot of people that disagree with hunting, don't like it, afraid of it, discourage it, see it as a violent or gun-related, whatever sport, and seek to impair it. This isn't about what our options are today. It's about preserving them in the future, because we've seen that erosion, and it concerns us.
I would say to that, other than, on the other hand, for example, what about property rights? Does this mean that if you want to hunt in my backyard that I have to let you? I have turkeys walking through my backyard all the time. I mean, I think, we have a legislature that deals with issues as they come up. What I hear Mr. Mumpower talk about, or Dr. Mumpower, I apologize. What I heard Dr. Mumpower talk about is preemptively changing our Constitution around something that we think might happen in the future. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I continue to urge you to please vote no. Oh, I'm sorry. I would just like to acknowledge, because he came in, Representative Ager.
Yes, thank you. I just sort of realized that I was given like a bunch of these, and I've got like 5 questions that deal with this hunting and fishing, which let me kind of put them together, and then you can kind of see. What groups are trying to undermine the freedom to hunt and fish, and how are they undermining this freedom? Is this a veiled effort to limit gun control legislation? And with the hunting and fishing amendment, if it was in place, would the General Assembly still be able to control over fishing? So that's kind of a group together.
That's a lot.
Well, I mean, but it's kind of all one question.
I think the senator's first.
Oh, I apologize. I know of no impediment to hunting and fishing, and I asked several times. Every time I got an email from someone asking me to support this bill, I said, could you please tell me what the impediments are so that I can work on those? I believe in the right to hunt and fish. I just don't believe we need to change our Constitution to get there. There was a multiple part to that question.
Okay.
What was the last part? Would it impact? No. This bill really does nothing. It does nothing. It specifically states, except where existing law says. Okay, so the laws that we have to protect wildlife will still exist. Might they be threatened at some point in the future, given the tension between the right and what the legislation, how the legislation is written that enforces those laws? Maybe. But right now, it doesn't look like this does anything, negative or positive. But again, my point is our Constitution is more sacred than to be playing games to draw turnout.
We're not in a debate, but I have to pick up on this. This is the U.S. Constitution. It is about the future. That's what it is designed to protect. I don't have a copy of the North Carolina Constitution, but that's what it's about too. Not today only, but tomorrow, our children and their children. 3 parts to the question. Is this an effort to avoid gun control? I couldn't tell whether it's avoid it or create it. I don't think so. I haven't picked up on anything to indicate that. Our side would be fighting it left and right. My opponent's side would be doing the same if it were in reverse. I don't believe a concern. Which groups are impairing hunting? That one's easy. We have a lot of people, I don't know whether you've noticed a lot or not, but we have a lot of people in our community and in this state and this country who want to control everything but themselves. And they like to control things they don't understand or have no experience with. They do not understand our heritage of hunting. They're fearful of guns. And to be frank with you, we don't trust those folks. We see too much evidence of too many people with control issues. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Questions are a little complicated here to try to put them together. Okay. People are asking if we could be more specific. This is on the Second Amendment having to do with victims' rights. Exactly what does the amendment change that is not already in there? Can we have some absolute, or not absolute, but we have more specific understanding of the change? And why would this cost more money? And is the amendment itself, when you read the whole amendment, clear enough that there's not ambiguity in it? And why don't you think about that? There was one question here about reading the text of each of the entire amendments. And for those of you that weren't here at the beginning, if you simply, I'm not going to give you a URL because it's just easier to Google, Secretary of State, North Carolina, Secretary of State, Constitutional Amendments. And when you go on that site, they will show you the bill, and what is helpful is it has, it's what we call redlined. It shows what's the new language and what's the language being taken out, so you can see how the Constitution reads right now, and then be able to look at it and see the exact words that are being changed. So if you didn't, somebody did ask that question, I just want to be real clear if you weren't here in the beginning. Okay.
Who's first this
I've lost track. You, wait a minute, you just finished? So, but you were first.
Since this is kind of a technical question, I'm happy to go first unless you want to.
Doesn't matter.
Okay. My understanding is the big difference between what this law or amendment says versus what we currently have. And Smitty, if you want to correct me, please do. But I believe that right now you have the right to be informed of proceedings related to the accused, but you don't receive that automatically. Okay, you need to ask for it. All right. If our courts have to keep track of victims to make sure that they are informed, then that is a burden that they currently don't have for everyone. And so I believe it has been estimated that statewide that would cost about $30 million a year annually to do that. The ability to do that exists now. It's in our Constitution, but it has to be driven by the victim has to ask for it. So that's the big difference, and that's why there's additional expense involved.
Basically, what this does is give victims a stronger, more powerful, and meaningful place at the judicial table. We feel like that's right and just. It is a very weak link in our judicial system. We believe the cost considerations are dramatically exaggerated, that this can be done much more efficiently, and protocols can be established. And I'd like to make a point here. In my pocket, I pulled out that Constitution. We run the country, America, on a 30-page pamphlet. The language that you're finding in these amendments is somewhat abbreviated and narrow, just like this language. It's not perfect, just like this language. It's up to interpretation, just like this language. That's what a Constitution does. And then our legislators and our judiciary take it from there and flesh it out and bring it to life in a meaningful way. And we believe victims deserve more meaningful consideration in North Carolina. Thank you.
Okay, the next set of questions are on the tax question, and I'll kind of read them, and they kind of all go together. Why was 7% chosen? And does the capping it at 7%, will this have, this is a new, encourage wealthier retirees or higher income people to relocate to North Carolina? Mr. Bumpower, they're asking you what the rainy day fund is and what does it include, where does it come from? And does the limitation of 7% include corporations?
Happy to be wrong about this. Please correct me if I am incorrect. This has nothing to do with the corporate tax rate. What is our rainy day fund? It's a savings account that you have when you have Republicans controlling the General Assembly. Why the 7%? It's a cushion. It's a point of reasonableness. We've got it down to 5.25 now, yes, but it leaves some range in there. We've been up, if I remember correctly, as high as 10%. It is now. 10%, yes, and that was initiated under the other folks. Is it 10% now, or did that change? The cap. No, I'm talking about our tax rate has been up 10%, and we have been trying to whittle it down. What we tried to do was find a point of reasonableness where we did not paralyze our legislators, but we did, we'll be frank about it, constrain our opposition and the people that we feel like are careless with other people's money. Thank you.
Okay, so the corporate tax rate has been cut every session since I've been in the General Assembly. We're now, I think, the lowest in the Southeast. Some people think that's a great thing. I think corporations should pay their fair share. They're now, I think, at 3%. So yeah, this is just the personal income tax. The cap is 10%. We've lowered it to 7%. I don't know why. But again, my concern is when you look at how this General Assembly over the last several years has shifted the tax burden from those who can afford it to those who can least afford it. I think this is just one more step in that effort, and I think that's wrong.
This next set of questions is on the voter ID. Why is ID important for in-person voting, but not for mail-in voting? What evidence of voter fraud, where does the voter fraud come from? And related to that is a question from someone in Henderson County who says, we have a significant number of voters who either move away or have passed away without requiring ID. How does the Board of Elections prevent fraudulent voters from lying about their identity and address and committing voter fraud? So that kind of takes both sides of that question. When we've had at least one, if not two, of our voter ID laws knocked down, is it one or two that have been rejected by the court? One. And since our last one was rejected by the court, how do we know we'll get one that will pass constitutional muster if we allow this voter ID amendment as it is presently written?
Who's first?
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
I think Mr. Mumpari, or Dr. Mumpari,
All right.
you're bid first.
I believe the simple answer for why the difference in person voting versus early voting and absentee voting is the system of verification is pretty thorough. I'm impressed. I spend a fair amount of time at the Board of Elections watching them. I think they really try hard there. And there's a pretty sophisticated verification system that can catch most bad guys. On the day of the election, you can't do that. That's the simple answer. In terms of, is this going to fix all our problems? No. Teenagers still can go in and buy beer illegally in convenience stores, but it's harder for them to do that. It will be harder for people to do it. Nothing's perfect, not on a fallen planet for sure. And then that last one, we've failed in the past, and we would argue that's because we have a biased judiciary. We're confident of that. But very simple answer is every other state in the Southeast has it, and we have good models out there, and we will follow those and come up with a system that works better for most of the people most of the time, and that's as good as it gets. Thank you.
Okay, so it is true that voter rolls, because people move and they don't, I don't think I forgot last time I moved to notify the Board of Elections. So voter rolls do have bad data in them. That bad data, though, in the voter rolls does not mean that other people get to vote with your ID. It is a felony to vote in North Carolina with someone else's identity. That is a very big deal, and that alone discourages people from doing this. There is just not voter fraud. There, I think, have been 2 cases in the last election that we have data for, which I believe is 2014. 2 cases in North Carolina of people who voted in 2 locations. It is not clear that the ID would have even prevented them from being able to do that because they had an ID. So it doesn't fix anything, but as I said, it keeps people from being able to vote. We know that. We have experience. Why is it okay to deny people who come to the ballot, to come to the ballot place to cast their votes? Why is it okay to turn them away? And we know who gets turned away. It's people who are easily intimidated, low-income people, people of color. We've seen it happen by the hundreds and thousands, and they're going to tell you that we have to be worried about maybe 1 or 2 people, and for that reason, we should deny so many people this sacred right. Again, I just urge you to please vote no. It could be you that may be moved and didn't want to go to the DMV and stand in line for 3 hours. And so you're out of sync. You're still you. You still are registered to vote. You fix your registration. That's pretty easy. But maybe you didn't get the new driver's license, so I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's our first stop, I think.
That was our first one.
That's our first one. Okay, we did well, we did well. Oh,
Yeah, your turn.
all right, my turn. Okay. When I'm trying to read, I can't listen as well. Okay. I think, Dr. Mopar, when you were giving your speech, that you actually gave the defense backwards. The Fifth Amendment is the one about the appointment by the governors. And you gave an answer to that, but you gave it to the Sixth Amendment. Okay. I think I just want to make sure everybody understood. The answers were right, they were just to the wrong question. But they were your position. So, that being the case, I want to be clear, what we're talking about this time is, and I think really only you can answer this, is what do you plan to do if we have a ethics and election committee that is 4 and 4, Democrat and Republican? What do you do when there's a tie?
It's a good question, and I think the senator spoke to it earlier. Let me tell you what we have now. We have 4, 4, and 1. The 1 is appointed by the governor. The 1 is supposed to be nonpartisan. The 1 has a history of consistently voting for Democrats and consistently taking a liberal position. And they've done that over and over again on decisions that have come before them. I think the effort here, and I'll give you a perfect example, the Board of Elections right over down the street has 4 people on it. That's not convenient. what does it force them to do? To work together and find better solutions for problems. The effort is to get the power politics out of the equation, and this will force that to happen. I think it's an admirable experiment, and I'm impressed by it, frankly, as someone who watches it work, or try to work, down the street.
Senator, do you want to say anything about that?
The nine-member board that Dr. Moncur is talking about has only been in existence for the last year. I don't know what he means by over and over and over again. It sides with Democrats. They haven't made very many decisions yet. But again, a 4-4 board means that we cannot react as we need to the conditions that inevitably change on the ground.
Maybe one of, I'm just going to take Sheriff's part of it and ask a question. If we've only had this for a year, this kind of a committee, I'm looking at John Ager too, because he may know, or maybe you know, how did we do it before?
What we did before is the governor, there was the party of the governor had a one-person advantage on the board. So it was split between Republicans and Democrats, but the party of the governor had a one-person advantage. So under McCrory, it was there was a Republican advantage. Now under Cooper, it would have been a Democratic advantage, which is why they changed the law. They are not interested in the will of the people. They are interested in preserving power.
In other words, the decisions were made politically and through partisanship in favor, which is what we're trying to get away from. In terms of this body that's in there now, I think they've actually been there less than a year, but they have had to deal with impasses by local boards of board of elections, ours again being an example. And it is my understanding, I don't know that this is a fact, that in each and every case, they have voted in favor of the opposition party. I don't know how many decisions they've had, but you can guess. We went there in Buncombe County. We have 100 counties across North Carolina. I like the idea of them being forced to work together and find constructive solutions, or it goes up the chain where a larger body looks at the issue. Thank you.
Okay, on the Fifth Amendment, why did the drafters choose to have appointed judges serve for a longer term than who they're replacing? It's my understanding that that is how that reads. You don't?
I don't know that to be true, but
It is true, and it's because they believe that they will continue to hold the legislature. And in fact, I believe that what this will enable is when we go back, we are scheduled to go back in November, after the election, but before the new General Assembly is seated. So it's a lame duck legislature. So we know that they will have a veto-proof majority, in spite of what happens in the election. At that point in time, and we believe that if this amendment passes, they will use it to pack the court, the Supreme Court of North Carolina. That's why.
I understand the question better now. Again, this is not about today so much as tomorrow. The other side may be in control. I don't know what's going to happen in front of us. I wouldn't argue with the senator. Wouldn't surprise me what anybody does today. But this is about the future, and this establishes a nonpartisan effort. And that impresses me. I'm a Republican and a conservative, but I don't want us controlling the universe. And I think the more we can work together, and it's being proven over and over again, the better chance there is of us preserving this republic.
In light of that, what may be the largest growing political party in the state of North Carolina may be unaffiliated. So how can the unaffiliated voters be represented in a process? Is there a way to consider that?
I agree with those that feel it's wrong to lock out other parties in North Carolina. I don't admire the way we do that in North Carolina. Both sides do it, and I would point out to you that we have only been in authority for, what are we talking, 10 years now? 8 years? 8 years? So it's been going on forever. Please don't point just at us. But I agree with folks. I think it should be opened up. This is not addressing that in any way. I think it should. I wish everybody would speak to the fact that we have essentially a closed system in North Carolina, and I say that as the chairman of the Buncombe County Republican Party. Closed systems are not good things.
And what I would say, what I would add is that what we need to do is independent redistricting. I sat down recently, John Ager and I did, with commissioners from California, where they have an independent redistricting commission that has a lot of citizen input. And what impressed me about that was that since then, they have had election turnout as high as 75%. 75%. That's what happens when people feel that they're choosing their elected officials as opposed to their elected officials choosing them. They've also seen their General Assembly approval ratings go from the teens to 50%. I think that demonstrates that this can work and would go a long way to diffusing the politics. What we do now is we try to game the system. And I think, although not a panacea, independent redistricting would be a good move towards returning power to the voters and to the citizens of North Carolina.
Are there any more questions in the back? Do you have any more? No. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. We're ahead of schedule. This is a good thing. All right. Excuse me? Well, no, I have a couple more. I just didn't know whether there were still some more waiting. All right, this one actually was asked to Senator Van Dyne. It says, if you are against Victims' Rights Amendment, why did you vote for it as a part of House Bill 551?
And that's a fair question. And what I would say is, I didn't do my homework, okay? I did not realize how strong the protections were currently in our Constitution. So what I did was I looked at the bill and I thought, this is probably a good idea. We didn't have a lot of time. I mean, I love listening to Dr. Mumpower talk about bipartisan and regular order is gone from the General Assembly. We do not spend a lot of time in committee anymore. Things go very quickly from committee to the floor to a vote. And I missed this one because I didn't realize how strong our Constitution already was. So having had some more time after the vote and had And people came to me and told me I was wrong. And I appreciate that input. And I made a mistake. Not my only one.
I think
While you're coming up here, the General Assembly is a partisan activity. What we're talking about in these amendments are the subsets, the other committees, the committees that do the work and try to make things work better. The General Assembly has always been partisan and always choked out the party that's not in favor. That's how it works.
Okay, I think this is going to be our last question. I appreciate all of your really rapt attention. Is it not true that the rules governing what constitutes a valid photo ID have not been decided or are not a part of the language of this amendment? That validity could be important and very discriminatory. So how do people vote on this without more fleshing out of it?
I think that's a very fair question. I know most of the people in this room have perhaps a negative perception of our Republican leadership. I know a lot of these people. I know them to be people of heart and consideration, and I would be shocked to see them do some of the things that they're accused of and intentionally, purposefully excluding people. I don't see people like that when I interact with them. But more specifically to the question, again, this is a 30-page pamphlet that we use to run America. It is fleshed out by details. Nobody amends constitutions. State, city governance, state governance, you don't do that with a lot of language. You keep it simple and narrow, and then you fight it out to make the determination of the best way to bring it to life in a good way. That's what they're promising to do. Thank you.
And I would not disagree that the leadership in the General Assembly on the Republican side, that these are good quality people. I believe that. All you have to do is look at the legislation they passed in 2013 to see that student IDs were not allowed. The rules were very limited in terms of what IDs were permitted, and for that reason, in the 2016 primary, thousands of people were not allowed to vote. That is a fact. That changes the outcome of an election, and that's why this is a very dangerous and disingenuous piece of legislation.
Okay, I lied. We have one last question. This person has asked, it says, I've heard that 2 amendments lack the details of implementation. The details would be added if the voters approved the amendment. Is this true? And if so, which amendments? Do either of you know what they're talking about? 2 amendments?
I think it's true to some extent of all of them, for the reason I mentioned earlier. Nobody perfects these. Our founding fathers didn't perfect them. That's how you work it out in the General Assembly to determine that language and do it in the way we conduct business in North Carolina.
I think you do nevertheless have to be careful when you consider that they have already scheduled the session to flesh out these details at a time when we will have elected one body, but the previous body gets to write the laws. That doesn't seem very democratic.
All right. On behalf of the 28th Judicial District Bar and the Asheville and Buncombe County League of Women Voters, we sincerely thank Senator Van Dyne and Chairman Mumpower for what has, I think, been an informative and civil and the kind of discussions that we need to have. We thank all of you for coming to this forum, coming out on this night, And we encourage you to look for any additional information that you want by, as I mentioned before, going either to the Buncombe County Election Services website, the North Carolina Secretary of State, or the League of Women Voters has an information site called vote411.org. And so any of those places you can get additional information. I'd like to have a round of applause for Thank you all so much, and have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you. No, it wasn't tough. No, I really appreciate it. I wish that we could have. Thank you. It's really tough sometimes. We try to be not hard.
We show up to see them. We show up to see them. We show up to see them. No.